Well, welcome 12 o'clock. I know that some of you will not be with us next week. It's the most interesting thing. I've talked about this in prior Christmas seasons, but all of my friends who do what I do for a living, literally 99.9% of them around the country, as they move into Christmas, they go from however many services they have, they typically double their amount of services. We cut ours by a third. By two-thirds, we actually cut it. So I don't know if you know this, but in the world that I live in, anyone else, they're like, oh, Christmas Eve is the new Easter. I'm like, not in downtown San Francisco. It is not. So we go, instead of going from 3 to 6, like literally so many of my friends do in places where you guys are all traveling back to. And it's always interesting, too, that the sort of like pleasant complaints we get from you about not having a Christmas Eve service, we only get it from you on the years that you're actually going to be in town for Christmas. It's a fascinating reality. Even if we're selfless or on our way to being selfless, we still all think about what's in it for me. And I totally get that. We're not doing it because you didn't come last year. And so... But today I want to wrap up the Still With Us series and just get into it. And I believe that today's message, it's I don't know, I told our team this morning, I said, today's the day that I need to hear a message about the topic that we're going to talk about. I know I'm the one giving it, but it was one of those weeks where I needed to hear it. And the big theme of the talk is this: control. In fact, I'm calling the message Control and Surrender. We struggle with control. Mostly what we struggle with is wanting to be in it. Anybody else besides the pastor? Like, we just love being in control. And the reason we love control is because if we can control everything, then we are going to be okay. Or we think positively, if we can control everything, we will end up getting exactly what we want. But for me, I don't know if you're like this with control. It's not really that I want to be in control to give myself great things. Mostly, I want to be in control to protect myself from things that I don't want to get in the middle of. Anybody else? Like that, if I could just use control for positive or just to keep negative away, I think most of the time I would I just don't want to do that. And so what I want to talk about today is that you and I, most of us at least, we have a deeply embedded desire for control that actually appears as something else on the surface. Okay, so if you think about this table that's up here for me, like what you and I see in each other's lives and what people see in your life and what you even see in yourself and might be confused by is what's happening on the surface. But all of this is just appearing as something else. What's really going on beneath the surface is this desire for control. I'll give you 4 examples, and then you can make your own because we don't have time to be completely exhaustive with the examples. So I'm going to give you 4 examples of what could be true in your life that masquerades as really a desire for control. You can write in your own example and think about it as well because so many of us struggle with this issue. See, for some of you, people think that you absolutely love money. Like they're like, wow, this person, like we all kind of like money, but this person talking about you, whoever you are, they're like, they love money. They hoard it. They feel like they never have enough of that. They never share it. Like they've never bought me a coffee ever. Like they just love money. And what everybody thinks about you is that you're really like you overly love money. But what's true isn't so much that you love money. What's true is you love control and you have a deep belief that money's the pathway to control. Does that make sense? So it's appearing like something, but underneath it, there's a different reality. There's a different reality to it. Some people believe that you're an overly strict parent. And they're like, don't you love your kids? Like, why are you so overly strict? The reality is you do love your kids, but you have this deep embedded desire to control their future. And so you do the helicopter thing because you know that if you're close, then their future will be exactly like you want it to look. But then they're 30 living in your basement, and that's a whole different situation that you got yourself into. But really, it's not that you're a bad parent. It isn't. It isn't even that you set out to be a strict parent. It's just that you've got to have control, and you've told yourself, if I'm with them all the time, right? Some of you like ask the teacher, can I just sit in the back of the classroom during class all day because I've got to be close to my kids. Now, others of you, people look at you and they hear what you say about living in San Francisco and they're like, wow, you really don't like living in San Francisco. Perhaps that's true, perhaps that is true, but let me tell you what's underneath that surface level appearance. What's underneath that is you love control, and the place you moved from seemed a lot more controllable than the place you live now, right? And here's maybe my favorite one to show us how we do things. People look at your life and they think that you have a strong moral character. And the reality is you do. But what they don't know is that the reason you live that way is because you think with your good moral character, you will be able to control the flow of God's blessings into your life. Do you see how it masquerades? Do you see this deeply embedded desire for control? Like it shows up in different things, right? Like if I wanted to control the audience this morning, I might say or do certain things because I want to control the image that you have of me. I want to control kind of what you're thinking. And so this really shows up, and I'm not doing that, I don't think, at the moment, but I'm not sure. This really shows up in a myriad of ways in our lives. But what it could be, all the things that you see on the surface of your life, so just ask yourself right now, because it won't help me to give an example that doesn't resonate with you. Just ask yourself right now, what part of my life is such and such happening when in reality, it's a love of control that I have? And so what we tend to think is that if we just will do the right thing at the right time, in the right place, and in the right way, we will be able to control the future. And I want to make sure what we're clear on is this. The reality is you and I do get to, and we should, affect the future, but we do not get to control all outcomes when it comes to the future. So you should affect it, right? The other approach is to go, well, I don't have any control, so I'm just going to sit on the couch all day. I'm not going to work. No. We should affect what even God is wanting to do. He's called us to be a partner in what he's up to in the world, but we don't get to control the future. In the Still With Us series, we've looked at the life of Joseph, and we've left off last week by saying that Joseph is now second in charge of all of Egypt. He was sold by his brothers. He was accused of something he didn't do. He was put in prison. He interpreted the cupbearer's dream. The cupbearer forgot about him. 2 years later, though, God gives the dream to Pharaoh. They can't find anyone to interpret it. Cupbearer remembers, oh yes, there's this Jewish guy. They bring Joseph out. Pharaoh's like, wow, okay, you can come be the leader. And what Joseph said the dream meant to Pharaoh that got him really the job as number 2 in charge was this. He said, Pharaoh, what's going to happen is 7 years of plenty or abundance are going to come. And when those 7 years are over, they will be followed by 7 years of famine. And so Joseph's now leading the charge in Egypt. Egypt's the only place where there's food. The surrounding lands had started to endure the same famine. They're 2 years into the famine. The surrounding lands have the same thing going on. And because of the saving strategy of Joseph, there's only one place where you can get grain, and that place is known as the nation of Egypt. Excellent. And so everyone comes to Egypt to get food. Everyone, including the brothers of Joseph. Now, when they come into Joseph's presence the first time, somehow he's able to keep his disguise intact. He's able to conceal his identity. But when they enter his presence the second time, Joseph is unable to contain himself. And that's our text that I want us to look at today. So if you have a Bible or an app or anything like that, not any app will do, but if you have the right kind of app, if you have the YouVersion app or you have the Epic Church app, don't get on any other apps during this time. Genesis 45, verse 1 through 8, if you'll stand with me. And guys, this is a passion area for me because it's a lesson I feel like I have to keep learning over and over again. And maybe today will be brand new for you, but it could just be a reminder. There's been a number of things happen in my life this week that just reminded me that I'm not in control. And as you see Joseph encounter his brothers in this powerful exchange, it's supercharged with emotions, as you might imagine. It's been 13 years since he last saw his brother, and the last time he saw his brothers, they were selling him to some Midianite merchants. So you just think about what it might be like to be reunited with your family, with your siblings, 13 years to the day, perhaps, after they sold you into slavery. Here's the scene. Verse 1, then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, have everyone leave my presence. So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. I mean, this guy was wailing. He was sobbing. This is where I know some of you advocate for that open floor plan where everyone works together, but when you're sobbing, everybody knows. Everybody knows. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father, the first thing he wants to know, what about Jacob? Is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. Now, there's only a couple of reasons why you might ask them to come close. Everybody with me? Is it going to be one of these? Or are you going to be fisticuffs? Like, what's happening? Come close to me. When they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. They only had one brother named Joseph. I don't know why he said all that, but he's like, oh yeah, the one I am is... And now do not be distressed. We won't even get through this text. I'm working on it. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. You may be seated. Question will be on the screen is this: if we need control to have hope in our lives, what do we do when we discover that control is merely an illusion? If your hope quotient this morning, and let's be honest, because we're at church, and you should be when you're not at church, if your hope quotient is low this morning, it could be because you feel like you've been losing control. But what I want to advocate for today is that control is merely an illusion. And I want to show you 3 things that I think Joseph can teach us about control. And I'll even go so far as to say this: Joseph gives us an entire theology of control. Theology is just what do we believe specifically about God and particular things that apply to God. And so what I want you to see today is Joseph's theology of control, because you and I need a theology of control. Because here's what our current theology is for most of us. If I feel like I'm in control, I have a lot of hope. If I feel like I have no control, I don't have a lot of hope, right? That's not a good theology. Okay, so what I want to do is allow Joseph to really bring us into what he has learned to be true about control. As I begin this part of the message, going through 3 lessons Joseph teaches us, you might at first feel like hope is slipping away from you, but I believe that hope that begins to evade you this morning, I believe that's a false sense of hope. And if you'll hang in through the rest of the talk, I believe that God wants to replace that false sense of hope that you're about to lose the grip on with a real grounded or a real steadfast sense of hope. Okay, that's what I think God wants to do for us today. As Joseph went through his life, 3 lessons he learned. Here's the first one. We do not have ultimate control over our lives. Newsflash. We do not have ultimate control over our lives. All of us have walked up against this truth at some point in time, but for some reason we start forgetting this truth, don't we? Like I start thinking, if I just do this, this, and this as a dad, as a husband, right? If I do this as the pastor, then these results are guaranteed. But the reality is, I don't have control ultimately over my life, and neither do you. Joseph was his father's favorite. Did that give him control? The answer is no, okay? It's 12 o'clock. Did Joseph do the right things under Potiphar, his master? The answer is yes. And yet Joseph was still accused of doing the wrong thing and put into prison. Did Joseph help the cupbearer out by interpreting his dream in a favorable way? Yes, but even though he helped the cupbearer still forgot him. Joseph had this theology. Now, he probably began his life where we all begin it, and we don't need to feel guilty about beginning with this place of theology of control. He began his life by thinking, because I'm my dad's favorite, this is going to go well. He began his life thinking at the age of 17, because God gave me a dream, this is going to go well. He began to think that if I do the right things for Potiphar, this is going to go well. If I help the cupbearer out in prison, this is going to go well. Where are we kind of lying to ourselves, saying if we do A, B, and C, then we'll go get D? You don't have ultimate control over your life. You can do everything God tells you to do, and you still don't have control. You can have multiple degrees from an elite university, and you still don't have control. You can have the best business plan known to man, and still you don't have control. I can lead this church with all the wisdom that I can muster up from the very best mentors on church growth that I can find. I can give it all I have, and that still doesn't guarantee anything for Epic's future. You can read all of the parenting books and implement all of them, and you still won't get perfect kids. You know this, right? Because if you implement all of them, 1 week you'll be doing this thing, and then the second week you'll be doing the exact opposite because you read all the parenting books, right? Guys, I'm here to tell you that you can exercise 7 days a week, twice a day. Why would you? I don't know. But you still might not control your health. You can affect a lot of things. We should. God calls us, I would say, to affect a lot of things. God has never called you to control anything because he's set up such a way that you would never have ultimate control. So for some of you today, the big lesson is, oh my gosh, I'm not in control. I got the degree. I'm on top of my company. I exercise all the time. I don't do any substances, which is great. All that's fine. And you still might end up with cancer because you don't have ultimate control, right? You might be the best boss on planet Earth, and people will leave because you don't have ultimate control. You may give it your very best, and you'll want to blame it on yourself, but the reality is, no, you don't have ultimate control. Number 2 lesson that Joseph learns throughout his life before we get into this text is this: no one else has ultimate control of our lives. And for a lot of you, I would say a good slice of you in this room, this is what you need to lean into today. This is the hope for you because you've told yourself such and such person has all control in my life and they're keeping me from what I want. Joseph's brothers could sell him, but they could not dictate his future, right? Potiphar's wife could accuse Joseph, but she could not plan out the rest of his days on earth. Potiphar could throw Joseph into prison, but he could not keep God from rescuing him from that same prison. The cupbearer could forget about Joseph, but he could not demand that Joseph be sitting in prison for the rest of his life. And the same is true for you, and you need to lean into this reality. Your boss does not have total control of your life. They don't. They might have control over whether or not you get a paycheck, but they cannot control whether God provides for you in a different way. Some of you had previous dating relationships, maybe even you were married before. Your former spouse can hurt you with their words, but they cannot keep God from blessing you with a beautiful future relationship. And then we have politicians, right? And we're like, oh no, I'm not going to be able to do X, Y, and Z. If God calls you to it, you will be able to do it. Politicians can make decisions. They can create procedures. They can decide what's going to be law, but do they get the final say-so in your life? No. It's time for us to quit living as though, I know I don't have control, but I think this person or that group or this kind of industry, they have control over my life. Guys, they don't have control over your life. The third lesson that Joseph learns is where I want us to camp out the rest of our time. The third lesson Joseph learns is this: God alone has ultimate control over our lives. God alone has ultimate control over our lives. Joseph learns early on that he can do all the right things and he still doesn't control the future. Thankfully, Joseph learns early on that people can do things to him, but they don't have ultimate control either. And when he has this powerful moment with his brothers, he sinks into the reality that I now see what happened. I now have this larger view and theology and belief around how control works. I know that God is the one who commanded this to happen. Do you see where it says right in verse 4, Joseph says to his brothers, he said, I am Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. Does Joseph sweep it under the rug what they did? Does Joseph deny the part that they played? No, he doesn't. He recognizes that there's some ownership for his brothers to play, but when it comes to control over his life, he doesn't give them that ownership. This is true. People have hurt you. Bosses can fire you. They can keep you from doing things. Your spouse might walk out on you. They can do things to affect you. They must take ownership of that, but they do not get to take ownership over whatever God wants to do in your life. Do you believe that? Some of us, we've given up on our God-given dream, right? 2 weeks ago, remember, Joseph got the dream, and we said, he's thinking the whole time he's enslaved and in prison, this is not the dream. And some of you are like, my dream is over because someone more powerful than me decided to put an end to it. And I want to tell you today, they might be more powerful than you, but they're not most powerful above God. We just keep giving power away to people who don't have it. Whatever they did to you, they don't get to determine your future. And I want to say this too, it's not just about people. Some of us have given power to the mental health situation that we're going through right now. I want you to know that God's heart breaks over that. We want to make sure that we can help you get the help that you need, but that disease or the mental situation going on, it doesn't have more power than God. Some of you are watching at home today because I know you're facing a chronic illness, and I'm here prophetically to tell you today that whatever you're facing, I know it has you down, but it does not have God down. He is able to overcome whatever you're going through. I don't know what you're up against. But I want you to tell yourself right now, I want you to think about the most powerful person or group or situation. Maybe it's in your body, maybe it's in your mind, maybe it's at your company, maybe it's in your family, maybe it's in your relationship right now. And I want you can say it out loud or under your breath. I just want you to tell yourself, this thing, this person, this issue does not have more power than my God does. They don't. They don't. Pharaoh's the most powerful person in the world at this time. And when Joseph comes along, Joseph has a response that is just beyond my maturity as a Christian. Anybody else? Look at verse 5. Here's how Joseph responds. Remember, 13 years since he saw his brothers, they're the reason for all of the heartache, or so they could be in his mind, if he didn't have a proper theology. In verse 5, here's what he essentially says. My interpretation. hey guys, don't worry about what you did to me. I know you wanted to kill me. I know you wanted to sell me. Like, don't worry about that. God sent me here to save your life. I am not responding that way. I'm like, God, I'm going to ask your forgiveness, not your permission. Like, right? I mean, I'm just not, that's just not in me. But it should be in me because I, like Joseph, don't need to give more power and control to people that they actually don't possess. And he says something, if you understand the narrative of Christianity, this should strike you. Something should start spinning in your head. Everybody knows Christianity, the faith that we're part of. We're a Christian church. Everybody has that down. He says this, the evil thing you did to me, God used it to send me ahead of you so that I could save your life. Any narrative in our faith starting to come alive in you? Yeah. The people who did the evil thing to Jesus by means of a control tactic, they thought the very evil thing they're doing to Jesus is going to be the very thing that saves their life later on. See, Joseph had a theology about control. And it's a theology that I haven't lived well with this week. There have been a number of things that have unraveled that have gotten, as I said to people close to me, like it's beyond my control now. And today I just need the reminder, Ben, it always was. But you don't have to freak out because it isn't beyond God's control. You see, I said in the first part of this talk, we might begin to lose our grip on control, but what I think we're losing is a grip on the false sense of control. And what I hope we can begin to embrace today is a grip around this grounded or this steadfast sense of hope when it comes to control. That's what God wants to give you today. And if we're learning today that God is in control, we need to ask the question, what is he like and what will this kind of God do with the control that he has? Right? I mean, Joseph begins to say, in verse 8, I think it's fascinating. He says, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, over his Lord of his entire household and ruler of all Egypt. Who does he give credit to? Interestingly enough, he doesn't give credit at this moment to Pharaoh. Why? Because he has a bigger theology of control. Guys, we've got to quit giving credit. Ultimately, we can thank people. I'm sure he thanked Pharaoh for the role. It's better to be second in Egypt than it is to be tops in prison. Anybody, not that you have experience, but if you had. But he doesn't give credit to Pharaoh. You see, he has this deep belief that we, over the 8 years we've been a part of a church and over the 8 years that our family has lived here, it's been a belief that we rally around. And of all places where I found it, it's in Proverbs. Proverbs is like a book about wisdom, and yet in Proverbs 21:1, you see a theology of control. Is how I want to teach it right now. Some of you will remember who have been at Epic for years and years, we've really leaned hard into this word, but I think this word teaches us everything we need to know about the theology we should have around the issue of control. Here's what it says in Proverbs 21:1, and some of you need to make this your theme verse for the coming year. It says, in the Lord's hand, the king's heart is a stream of water that he, the Lord, channels toward all who please him. It's a great, a way to synthesize a theology of control. In the Lord's hand, I love that it says the king's heart. It doesn't say middle management's heart, right? You know why? Because the writer of Proverbs is trying to tell us something. He's trying to say whoever's the most powerful thing on earth or person on earth or the thing that you're up against that seem like they have all authority and power, what he's wanting you to know is there's an authority and a power that supersedes and is sovereign over even the most powerful. Pharaoh at this time is the most powerful person in the land. Who's the most powerful person in your land? Is it disease? Is it depression? Is it your boss? Is it the person that you're struggling relationally with? Is it the business or school you're trying to start? Is it some decision that you have about the future of whether you'll stay here or whether you'll move somewhere else? Like, who seems to be, in your equation, the most powerful person in the land? Whoever that is, God is wanting to say to you today, yeah, I've got their heart in my hand. And I'll channel it. Who does he channel it towards? All who please him, all who please him, towards all who please him. I started thinking today, I was doing this live at 9 o'clock, which is always dangerous. I prepare a lot, you guys, but at 9 o'clock, this thing hit me. Okay, Proverbs 21:1. In the Lord's hand, the king's heart is a stream of water that he channels towards who? Towards all who please him. I remember something else about pleasing God. What is it? Oh, Hebrews 11 says what? Without faith, it is impossible to So who does God use Proverbs 21:1 towards? People who exhibit faith in him, not on the back end because that's mere observation, but on the front end, right? On the back end, that is hindsight, but faith is a foresight. Faith is believing God's going to do it before I get to the end of the story. And I believe it on the front end that I don't know how it's going to happen, but God's going to come through for me. You guys, Proverbs 21:1, if I could tell you about the biggest obstacles in the last 8 years, this is the reality we have found. When we moved here, we needed a first grade spot. And if you know anything about getting first grade spots in the public schools of San Francisco, out of school that you want to go to, it's not easy because you assume that everyone who was in kindergarten at the school, they're all going to, bless you, going to go into first grade together. They're going to go into first grade together unless God positions one of those classmates to move to Germany temporarily so that one of those Pilgreen kids gets a first grade spot. 2 years later, Zoe moves back and she ended up graduating with Elijah, but she needed to go to Germany for a couple of years so we could get that spot. Because once you get him in, then you got the sibling thing. It's like, all right, God, we don't need you to move in this way unless they break the system again. Then when I think about the spaces that Epic's gotten, it's been Proverbs 21:1. I don't know if you know this, but landlords in downtown San Francisco aren't dying to give their spaces to churches. They're not like, okay, we could have Facebook, Google, or Epic Church. Let's go with the church. But God's able to channel things. How did he do it here? Here's how he channeled it here. I believe that God put on the minds of the owners, of course, they probably just wanted it for the money, but to sell this building. And then I think God, like he gave Pharaoh bright ideas and gave Joseph bright ideas, I think he gave the ownership here bright ideas. Hey, if you want to have the maximum selling value that you could have, what if you put a tenant in a space in the basement that had never existed before? What if someone actually rented that 11,000 square feet and actually signed a 10-year lease? What if that could drive the price of the sale up by millions? It's exactly what happened. Who knew that when we needed a space, God began to maneuver things? Just so you know, in case you want to be clued into what my prayer life looks like, I'm already praying for whatever's next in terms of real estate that God will go ahead and unlock it. Why? Proverbs 21:1. Doesn't matter who the landlord thinks he is. Doesn't matter what Soma's becoming. Doesn't matter what the law of the land is. We have a law that's greater than the law of the land. We have a power that's more powerful than anyone who's in office, any landlord who thinks, I would never do that. God may make them poor in a sense where it would behoove them. Who knows why? When the San Francisco Business Journal interviewed the people who sold this building, they said this church was the missing piece. Who says that? In the Lord's hand, the king's heart, is a stream of water that he channels toward all who please him. So if you and I don't have control and God has all control, what options do we have? We can continue to pretend like we have control. Go for it. We can freak out over our loss of control, or we can surrender ourselves under the God who has all control. I said earlier that you and I don't have ultimate control, but do we have any control? Here's what's odd to me. We try to control everything we actually can't control, and we don't control the one thing we actually can control. When you look at the scriptures, this is not our favorite form of control, but it's the only kind we've been invited to have. It's one of the fruit of the Spirit. It's called self-control, our favorite. Anybody have way too many sweets around the kitchen right now for the holidays? I'm just like, God, I know it's a fruit of the Spirit, but there are 400 cookies in the kitchen. What am I going to do? You know? What I love about Joseph's story, you guys, when he realized he had no control over his future, he knew that he had self-control. Joseph was given an ornate robe by his father. You know that even if you're not a church person, yeah? What I learned about that robe is that it was long, so it would have been long sleeve and it would have been long to his feet as well, which meant he wasn't going to likely be doing manual labor. So when he gets put into slavery, he could have been like, I don't do this, right? Like, God, that's why I moved to San Francisco. I don't do anything with my hands, right? No manual labor here. But instead, he rolls his sleeves up and he gets to work. And his work ethic allows him to be tops in Potiphar's household. But then he gets sent to prison. He could have given up there. But he exercises self-control, continues the same work ethic. Now he's put in charge of the entire prison. He does such a good job of interpreting Pharaoh's dreams that guess what? Now he gets put in charge of all of Egypt. Exercise self-control. When Potiphar's wife kept asking Joseph to sleep with her, let's not act like we're churchy people right here. We're just real people, okay? What would have been the easy thing for him to do? All right, 3 of us are going to be honest humans in this room. Everybody's like, my wife's here. Dude, listen, what would be easy? We didn't say what you did. We just said what would be easy. It would have been easy, guys. Dream's not going to happen. Attractive woman, husband's gone. Why not? Self-control. When he gets a chance to enact revenge on his brothers, he blesses them instead. Self-control. 13 years from the dream until this moment, he would have been tempted, at least I would have been tempted, to bow out on my faith in God. He remains. One of the words I was thinking about in my own prayer time yesterday is just the word perseverance. I think what I want in life is for it to be easy, my faith to always be strong, and my vision to be clear. Sometimes when those things aren't present, God just wants me to persevere. I was reading, James 1, 2 through 4. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, when you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance, and perseverance must finish its work in you, Ben, so that you might be mature and complete, not lacking anything. I was looking at Galatians 6, 9. Do not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time you will reap a harvest if you do not give up. Hebrews 12, reading about Ben, you're called to run your race with perseverance. And guys, sometimes that's what self-control looks like. Not giving up when it would be easy to give up. Not giving up when I don't have the flashy vision. Not giving up when I don't have the kinds of confidence that I wish I had. I love living with confidence, and when that goes away, sometimes I just got to hang on. Anybody else? Until I see the light again. Sometimes that's the test of self-control. And we say around Epic all the time, in any endeavor, you need to ask, what is God's part in this endeavor, and what is my part in this endeavor? When it comes to control, I know the part you want, that's not your part. And you will be glad, ultimately, it's not your part. God's part is control. Your part is trust. God's part is orchestration. Your part is obedience. Will you play your part? That's all he's asking you to do. Will I play my part? Let me ask you this question that will be on the screen. Do you really believe God is able to orchestrate the specifics of your life and future? Do you really believe that? Think about it. I need to think about it too. Do you really believe God is able to orchestrate the specifics of your life and future? If so, why are you and I spending so much time trying to orchestrate it ourselves? Hello? Just me? I'm like, no, God, I've got this figured out. You never thought about this. There's this algorithm, and then there's this, right? His brothers sold him. God used that to get him to Egypt. Potiphar's wife accused him. God used that to get Joseph to prison. While in prison, the cupbearer forgets about him. God uses that initial forgetfulness so that 2 years later, when God gives Pharaoh the dream, all of a sudden, cupbearer remembers. God keeps everyone else from being able to interpret the dreams. Cupbearer remembers, wait a minute, I met this Hebrew in prison. I know, Pharaoh, crazy story, but I met a Hebrew in prison. He's really good at this. And this gets Joseph to be second in command. And then God purposefully allows a famine to happen in the surrounding lands. Why? So that the brothers of Joseph will have to come to Egypt to get grain from their brother. God will do whatever it takes to position and maneuver you and I in our lives to the place he wants us to be. But he wants to know, are we going to be on the front end of believing that, or are we just going to talk about it after the fact? You see, when it comes to God's control, okay, Ben, if God has all control and I don't, what's the point? Well, God seems to direct certain things, certain places, depending upon if we come under his control and surrender, or if we find ourselves outside of it, or if we're trying to war against what he's trying to do in the world. We don't want to become the person who God's having to channel our lives so that he can do for other people who are seeking to please him with their lives. You don't want to become the person in the way of that. Trust me. Trust me. I want to show you where the text and where our series ends in Genesis 50. It's the last chapter in the book of Genesis, verse 15 through 20. Here's what went down. Joseph's brothers begin to think maybe the only reason he's being nice to us is because our dad is around. You know how this works, right? In our house, they don't care if dad's around. They're going to act the same. But at everyone else's place, it's mom and dad are watching. And so while Jacob's alive, they're thinking, okay, he's nice to us, but let's see what happens when our dad dies. And here's what goes down in verse 15. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him? So they sent word to Joseph saying, your father left these instructions before he died. I don't know if this is true, by the way. I don't know if he did. But they're just saying, hey, Joseph, just so you know, here's what dad said. He can't defend himself. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father. When their message came to him, though, Joseph wept. Why? His brothers then came. They threw themselves down before him, and look at the irony. We are your slaves, they said, because we would rather be slaves than be dead. But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives, the saving of many lives. There's a question that wraps up his entire theology of control. Verse 19, what does he say? But am I in the place of... Joseph realized something. He realized that he wasn't in the place of God. He also thankfully realized that Pharaoh and Potiphar and his brothers, they weren't in the place of God. But he realized there was a God in place. And a God in place who, if Joseph would follow him, God would position sovereignly the steps in Joseph's life so that even when it didn't make sense over those 13 years, God was still going to bring about good for Joseph and glory for God. I believe, and I don't have easy answers for you today, but I believe that's what God's up to in your life. I just want to know, are you going to be on board with what he's up to? Am I going to be on board? Are we as a church, when we can't figure out the future, when people come and go as they do so much, that's hard. I can't control that. I wish I could. Are we going to be a kind of church that keeps leaning in and say, God, I don't know what you're up to. I don't know how this is going to work out. Some of you are like, I don't know how I can afford it. I don't know how I can come into it. I don't know how this can be redeemed. I don't know how I can be healed. I don't know. But you do need to know this. God has all control, and he's using it towards us. For our good. Do you know that this is really important? When people saw on the surface the death of Jesus, here's what they thought. They thought someone overpowered him and killed him. That's what it looked like. Would you agree? Yes, Pastor, that's what it looked like. But every time that Jesus talked about it, and even when Paul would write about this moment in his epistles and his letters, here's what he would say about it. He would not say they overtook him and killed him. They would say this about Jesus. He loved us and gave himself up for us. Why? Because if you have all control, the only way you go to a cross and are crucified is if you give up what you have. He loved you and gave up. What does our God do with the control he has? He gives it up so he could rescue you. You see, Joseph said to his brothers, God sent me here ahead of you to save your life. God's saying to us today, I sent my son here ahead of you to save your life. Now, some of you, the reality is you're not a Christian yet today, and that's totally cool, but the reason you're not a Christian is because you've said you don't want to give up control. I've got newsflash that's going to disappoint you. Whether you become a Christian or not, you won't have control. So Ben, what's the point? Well, the point is when we come across that line of faith and say to Jesus, I trust you, the one who has all control, we come under his control rather than being around it or outside of it or ending up being an opponent to the kind of control that he has. And he's invited us. He loved you. He had control, and he gave up control, not because those religious leaders overpowered him. He gave up control so that you might be welcomed in as a son or a daughter of God. I want to ask you to pray with me under that idea. In a moment, the band's going to lead us. You're going to have a chance for communion. And actually, look real quick. We added a third station right up here to my left, just so you know, to kind of help with the traffic flow today. But I really want you to be thinking about as you come and take the elements. Jesus said this. He took a piece of bread and he broke it and said, this is my body, which is being offered for you. It's broken for you. And then he took the cup, passed it around to the apostles, and he said to them, this is my blood that's been poured out for you. And so we come taking the elements today that represent his broken body and that represent his blood that was poured out for the forgiveness of our sin. And I'm going to say this to you. Paul said it to the Corinthian church. He said, don't come at this flippantly or haphazardly today. Don't walk to the communion table lightly. But he said, take some time to examine yourself. Is there anything between you and God? And as you take the elements today, what I want to encourage you to do is this. Jesus, thank you that though you have all control, you love me and you gave yourself up for me so that I could experience salvation. So Lord, that's our prayer today. We want to celebrate you, Jesus. We want to celebrate, just like you did with Joseph to save his brothers, you've done, God, by sending your son, Jesus, to save us from our sins. We celebrate that. God, help us to willingly give up the control we thought we had to the one who has it all and is at work for our good and his glory. In your name we pray, Jesus. Amen. I want to ask you to stand, or you can stay seated. Let's respond. And the element tables are ready to my right, to my left, and towards the back.